Hi there. Welcome back. Yeah, it's been a minute, but we're back and we're here to talk about Stormlight 4, baby. It's time. I've been waiting for like 3 years for this thing. Rhythm of War. It's out by Brandon Sanderson. Book 4 of the Stormlight Archive. Oh shit. Book 4 of the Stormlight Archive. It's out. And let's discuss, yeah? So, disclaimer here, I am an unapologetic Stormlight fanboy. This is my favorite series. It has been ever since I first read Way of Kings, Book 1, way back in the day. This is basically the only series that I'm willing to day one purchase a hardcover for. So that should tell you that this is a big deal to me. I am biased as hell. I'm not going to be objective. I can't be objective. I love this thing too much, you know? But I'll try to be objective here. But just keep my biases in mind because you are not me. You will have your own opinions. You might not even know what the hell this thing is, right? It's book 4 of a series of like 1,200 page breaks. Look at this thing. Look at this thing. You could kill someone with this. you could legitimately decapitate a small child with this book. But I understand that a lot of people are not going to know what's going on because of that. So for people who aren't familiar with it, or for people who are but haven't had a chance to read book 4 yet, I'm not going to spoil book 4 at all because I understand it's new. However, I will refer to like general events and like general direction and structural things about the other 3 books without talking about specific events like, oh, this person killed that person or anything like that. So if general direction of the story is a spoiler for you, then, don't watch. But if you're not really sure what this series is about, then maybe hearing about the general direction will pique your interest. So stick around. I don't know. It's up to you. So the Stormlight Archive is a series that is really hard to even like summarize because there's legitimately so much going on in the background and in the foreground. And there's so many different like layers and elements to the story. Like, how do you even summarize this? Well, there's a lot of storms in the world, and pretty much their whole society is like built around surviving the storms. So, everything from the architecture to the wildlife, there's like crabs. Every animal is a crab in this series. But like, how do you define and explain the story? Well, I don't know. So I'm not really going to try to give you a summary. There are summaries out there if you want to find them. And there are people out there who have made extremely detailed and quality analysis videos about every little element of the world building and foreshadowing and theories. And, I don't really do that stuff. I love reading about people's theories, but I'm garbage at making them. So for me, hopefully I can provide some value when I talk about the themes and the general direction of the writing in this book from a structural point of view, rather than from a sort of world building and specific story element point of view. Now, the first thing that really jumps out to me about Rhythm of War is the fact that it carries a really strong sense of melancholy. Like, Stormlight Archive is a series that focuses a lot on mental health, and because of that, there is a lot of sort of melancholy elements to the character writing throughout the series. But in general, it's a series you would describe as being very optimistic. Grimdark has been a very popular subgenre of fantasy, and in general, I think just darker, grittier writing has become a lot more popular recently. But as a counter to that, as sort of a counter-cultural element, we've also seen more optimistic series become more popular. And I think a lot of people have started calling it hope punk. Stormlight, I don't know if it strictly qualifies as that, but it is a pretty optimistic series in general. But in this one, there's this constant ominous feeling that builds throughout the story, and it creates a feeling of like something being missing from your soul, from the soul of these characters in this world, and as a result of that, from the soul of the reader. And I think it's a very intentional choice. This isn't a criticism at all. Now, the reason why I think this is actually a good thing and why I appreciated it is because of how it ties into the character writing. A lot of these characters do have something missing within themselves, and they're on this journey of self-discovery, and there's a lot of duality here where people are trying to figure out who they are amidst these disparate forces that are pulling them in different directions. They have to discover where they actually land among those disparate forces, and until they do, they just don't feel fulfilled, right? And because of that, I do feel like this sense of melancholy carries over well. You know, there's a lot of inner conflict that these characters are dealing with. That's always the case, and it is the case in most good books. You know, characters are going to deal with conflicts within themselves, but in this one, it really stands out even in comparison with the previous books in the series. And I gotta say, I'm very impressed with Brandon Sanderson's character writing. It's come a long way since like Mistborn Book 1, which is the first book I ever read by him. Back in the day, you know, Mistborn is like a masterpiece in plotting and pacing, but I always found the character writing a little bit flat. And I think Stormlight was already a big step up in that regard, but every passing book, I'm just more and more impressed with his character writing. I am pretty impressed with basically every character in this series. There are a couple that are weaker than others, but even those I get, you know, and there's a reason why they act the way they act that I understand and that has been communicated effectively to me as the reader. And because of that, I don't feel like, oh my God, not this one again. So going back to that sense of self-discovery and self-actualization that I was talking about with a lot of the characters and their inner conflicts, I'm not going to spoil anything, but every character does go through it to some extent. They're all trying to figure out who they are, some in a more literal sense than others. If you've read the other 3 books, then you know Shallan has some issues. You know, she's got some shit to figure out. And there's some very literal self-discovery that needs to happen for her. But it's not just her, it's the other characters as well. You know, ever since book 1, we've seen Kaladin struggle with these 2 different aspects of his identity. You know, his life as a soldier, as a killer, as someone who takes life even as he seeks to protect. And that contrasts with his upbringing as a surgeon and the son of a pacifist. And the fact that his father is completely disgusted by the idea of someone killing and finds it inherently contradictory for someone to kill to protect. And that's something that he struggles with in all 3 books, but it comes back with a vengeance in this one. I won't go into detail, but, you know, he has to figure out who he is and where he stands in that sort of duality. We have Adolin, who, when we first met him in book 1, he was, you know, a well-meaning but kind of bratty, kind of privileged young prince, and he idolized his father, right? He grew up in this warlike society, and his viewpoints and his opinions were a reflection of that society, right? Being told ever since he was a kid that his father was, maybe not anymore, but was at one point, the ideal man, the ideal Alethi man, and seeing how that affected him and made him idealize this very flawed human being who we also learned more and more about throughout the course of the 3 books. And over those 3 books, we started to see Adolin discover who he is, separate from his father, right? And it's a very human story, you know, someone trying to live up to their parents' expectations and their parents' footsteps. Someone who leaves a very large shadow is very difficult to escape from, right? But Adolin is going on this very relatable journey of self-discovery. He's not his dad, and that's okay. And his dad himself is not the ideal man that Adolin was always told he was. And the ideal itself was flawed because Alethi culture kind of sucks. We have Venli, who towards the end of book 3 started to feel these disparate forces pulling at her, also kind of literally. If you know, you know, but if not, I won't spoil it. There's a lot of duality here. Navani also takes a very front and central role in this book, but I don't want to explain her arc or anything about it. Again, if you know, you know, but I just wanted to communicate that I'm very impressed with the overall direction that these books are going in with the character writing and the fact that the thematic consistency is so clearly well thought out. Now, Stormlight Archive is a very difficult series to summarize, like I said, but as far as the core theme goes, it is ultimately a series about colonialism. You know, this is a colonial conflict at its core that we're seeing play out with a lot of other stuff thrown in, but it is a colonial conflict nonetheless. And I find that fascinating, partially because of how it relates to real life conflicts. What is the correct and just outcome for a situation like this when the initial conflicts are so far in the past? I mean, obviously the injustices created by those things are plain for all of us to see and continue to this day. The aftermath of those incidents didn't just disappear. You know, history is not compartmentalized like that. Everything leads into everything else, and there are very real issues in the current day. But how do you resolve those things when at this point in time, both sides of this conflict have been living on the same land for so long? So many generations have passed now that nobody knows another life than the one they've lived on Roshar. So what do? How do you solve this situation so that everyone is happy, so that everyone has a home, so that no one is living the life of a second-class citizen or a slave? Well, it's a difficult question to answer. Certainly in real life, it's incredibly difficult to answer this question. I'm not going to try to give you the answer because I don't fucking know what it is, but it's not a one-to-one comparison with the conflict in this book because there are so many other magical elements in this story that are not necessarily easy to translate to the real world, but it's stimulating and interesting to think about because it is so relatable to our own world. There's a great video by a guy named James Tullos where he goes more in depth about how the Stormlight Archive is actually about colonialism, and I thought that video was really interesting. I'll link it in the description, and I think he explains it a lot better than I could. But one thing that I will say is a story like this does not work unless both sides of the conflict are developed adequately, right? You can't have one society that has all this depth and all these kinds of different people, and then another society that is basically just completely homogenous and one-dimensional. It just doesn't work. You can't develop the conflict in a way that actually creates a sense of doubt in the reader, which is necessary when you're dealing with a colonial conflict like this, because there needs to be doubt. There's no, easy answer to this question. So what Brandon did, which he needed to do, and he definitely pulled it off, was he showed us the inner workings of singer society and listener society in this book, and showed us, the ways that they're similar to humans and the ways that they're different to humans. He showed us their culture. He showed us that there are different opinions on how this war should play out and how the humans should be dealt with among the singers. And that itself is necessary to show because, of course, they're not all going to agree. But overall, this book did a great job of adding further layers to the conflict between humans and singers. And I wasn't really expecting to come away from this book impressed with the amount of social commentary in it, but I really, really did come away from it impressed with the amount of social commentary. There's one moment in particular with Venli that I thought was phenomenal. I'm not going to say what it is. If anyone wants to know, feel free to ask in the comments or something, and I'll let you know with a spoiler warning. With all that said, though, it's not a perfect book by any means. You've probably heard some very divisive opinions on it by now, I would imagine, because I've seen them. The main complaint is that the pacing is slow, and to be fair, it is pretty slow. If you were to list out all the things that happen in this book, you would not be listing out as many things as you would for the previous few books. There's less overall plot movement in this one than there are in the previous ones. But for me, I just don't really care. And the reason I don't care is because the inner conflict that the characters were dealing with was so engrossing to me, and the world building, the further layers in the world building and the culture of the singers and the conflict that they have with the humans, all of this stuff was fleshed out more and more and more. So the fact that, there wasn't as much plot movement, for me, not an issue at all. But it has to be said, it is a much slower burn than some people might be ready for. I thought the first half was very fast-paced. This book starts with a bang, and around the halfway point, it ends with a bang. But the second half of this book is very much a slow burn, but the payoff is so worth it. I cry in every Stormlight book. This one's no exception, and once you get towards the end, there are some really, really emotionally powerful moments that I'm going to hold very closely to my heart until the next one comes out. But yeah, it is very impressive how Brandon is able to add more layers to this world in ways that I didn't expect. You think you kind of have the gist of things, and then he just throws another curveball at you. Yeah, if you're not down with the world building or the inner conflicts that the characters are going through, I can totally see how this book would be a bit of a drag for you. I know for a fact there's going to be people who read this book and come away from it feeling like they just took a science lesson. They're just going to be like, what? What? How does this work? What? They're going to wish that Bill Nye showed up in the middle of this book to explain what the fuck is going on. But yeah, despite all that, there are some pretty mind-blowing moments in this book that I would be surprised if anyone saw coming. I can't believe this guy is able to surprise people in book 4 like this, in a series with 10 books. Like, you think you know where everything's going, and sometimes you're right, but at other times he just like completely pulls something out of left field, and I'm just like, wait, what? And it makes sense in hindsight, but like in the moment you're just mind blown. And he's so good at doing that, man. This guy he just knows how to plot his stories and lay out his stories. So if you're tired of like the George R. R. Martins and Patrick Rothfusses, hop on, bro. Hop on. There's plenty of space on the Stormlight train. My boy Brandon is playing chess, and we're all playing checkers. So overall, this is a great 4th book in a 5-book arc. You know, there are some elements of it that are just setting up the 5th book, which is going to tie everything together. But even setting that aside, I think the elements of this book, for the most part, worked really well. You know, the inner conflicts, the world building, the payoff at the end, everything about it just hits for me, except for the flashback sequence, which is kind of weak, but it's also pretty short, so I'm not really too bothered by that. But yeah, I loved it, but again, I'm biased as hell. Your mileage may vary. I would be very interested to hear what people think, and if you haven't read these books, I'm still interested to hear what you think. You know, like, do you want to read them? You know, are you more interested now than you were 20 or however many minutes ago, you know, before you started watching this thing? Let me know how you feel. I'm just going to be sitting around for about 2.5 years and then doing another reread before book 5 comes out. And boy, is that going to be a banger. I know Brandon's going to hit us with the sauce in book 5, all right? But yeah, that's about it for me. I'll see you guys later, hopefully sometime soon. Hopefully not another like 3 months or whatever. But have a great holiday season.